The sun was just rising over the city of Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. People were waking up, opening their shops, sweeping the dusty streets, and starting their day like any other. But deep inside the presidential compound, something unusual was happening. Ibrahim Traoré, the new leader of Burkina Faso, stood near a large window, looking out over the city. He was young for a leader, calm but sharp. Soldiers and ministers had begun to trust him because he spoke the truth and made bold decisions. The people believed he wanted real change. Still, not everyone was happy with him. Since he took power, some foreign governments had started to watch Burkina Faso more closely. They didn't like how he was cutting ties with certain countries and trying to work with new partners. In secret rooms across Europe and Africa, plans were being made to stop him. One morning, Traoré received a report from his military intelligence team. A low-ranking officer had noticed something strange. Radio signals, sent in short bursts, were coming from different parts of the country. They didn't match any known frequency used by local stations or military teams. Someone was sending messages, coded ones, and no one knew to whom. At first, it seemed like a small matter, maybe a technical glitch. But after 2 weeks, the signals were still coming, always at night, always from places where no one should be broadcasting. One time, it came from near a military camp. Another time, from a market square after midnight. Traoré sat in a dark meeting room with a few trusted men. Maps were spread on the table. Each signal location was marked with a red dot. Slowly, the dots began to form a pattern. "This is not random," said Alassane, the young cyber analyst who had discovered the signals. "Someone is watching us. Someone is studying us, and they are sending what they learned back to someone else." Traoré's jaw tightened. "A spy," he said quietly. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. But inside, he knew this was serious. Burkina Faso had too many enemies and too many secrets. If someone was inside the country, gathering military data and sending it to a foreign power, they could be planning something big. A coup, an attack. Worse. He ordered a small team to start watching hotels, airports, and foreign guests. Not loudly, not openly, quietly. He didn't want to scare anyone off. He wanted the spy to feel safe, to keep sending messages. And then, when the time was right, to catch him red-handed. The hunt had begun, but Traoré wasn't rushing. He knew the game of intelligence was like chess. Every move had to be precise, every decision had to be smart. And in this game, he couldn't afford to lose. Far away from Burkina Faso, in the busy streets of Madrid, a man sat alone at a small cafe near the train station. He looked like an ordinary traveler, wearing sunglasses and reading a newspaper. But his name was not the one on his passport. His real name was Valentin, and he worked for French intelligence. Valentin was known for being careful, smart, and calm. He had been on many missions before, but this one was different. He had been sent to gather information on Ibrahim Traoré, the new leader of Burkina Faso. The French government wanted to know how strong Traoré really was and who he was working with. Valentin's orders were clear. He had to act like a journalist. He had to fly from Madrid to Burkina Faso with a Spanish passport, take photos, speak with people, and find out everything he could about the military, the politics, and Traoré's plans. He met a man from the Spanish press agency who helped him get a fake press ID. "Don't talk too much," the man warned. "Journalists can ask questions, but not too many. You need to look real." Valentin smiled. He had done this before. He knew how to blend in. He carried a small camera, a laptop, and a black notebook where he pretended to take notes for news articles. But hidden inside his camera was a tiny device that sent signals. And inside his laptop, special software could connect him to secret French servers. After everything was ready, Valentin took a flight to Mali first, then crossed the border into Burkina Faso. He did not go to the capital, Ouagadougou. Instead, he stopped in Bobo Dioulasso, a quieter city in the west. Fewer eyes, fewer questions. He checked into a small hotel and told the staff he was there to report on local stories. They believed him. He was polite, paid in cash, and spoke a bit of the local language. Soon, he started talking to aid workers, market sellers, and even a few off-duty soldiers. He asked simple questions, but remembered every detail. Each night, he went back to his room and typed notes on his laptop. But he was not writing news stories. He was writing reports, where soldiers were stationed, what weapons they had, what roads were being used for military trucks. Then, with a few clicks, he sent the information far away, across the sea, back to France. Valentin was good at his job. No one suspected him. He moved quietly, took photos of buildings, and smiled at everyone he met. But what he didn't know was that someone had already noticed him. Someone in Burkina Faso's intelligence office had seen the strange signals, and they were now watching. The game of shadows had two players now. One was Valentin, the spy pretending to be a journalist. The other was Traoré, the soldier who had seen too many games played on his land. Both men were careful, both men were smart, but only one would win. In the heart of Burkina Faso, life continued as usual. The streets of Bobo Dioulasso were busy with traders, children playing, and the sounds of taxis honking. It seemed peaceful on the surface, but underneath, there were whispers of something unusual. People had noticed the new foreigner, the man who always had a camera with him, the one who spoke good French but didn't seem to know much about Burkina Faso. Valentin had spent a week in Bobo Dioulasso, moving from one cafe to the next, sitting quietly in corners, watching people. He took photos of buildings and markets, always pretending to be working. No one suspected a thing. He was careful with his words, never asking the wrong questions. But as he walked through the streets, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Meanwhile, back in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré's team had been growing more suspicious. The radio signals had not stopped. They were still coming in, faint but clear. Each signal seemed to be connected to something important. Someone was gathering information, and it wasn't just random chatter. Traoré had ordered a closer look, and that's when Alassane, the cyber analyst, made a discovery. The signals are all coming from a hotel near the market, Alassane said one morning, showing Traoré a map on his laptop. There's a guest who checks in regularly and seems to be sending data during the late hours. Traoré stared at the screen. It wasn't enough to accuse anyone yet, but the pattern was clear. The spy was in Bobo Dioulasso. He wasn't in the capital, hiding in plain sight. He was in a quieter city, blending in with the locals. But the signals told a different story. "Let's watch him carefully," Traoré said, his voice calm. "We need proof before we move." For the next few days, Valentin continued his work. He visited villages, spoke to farmers, took photos of roads, and observed military trucks. He was gathering everything he could. But as much as he tried to stay under the radar, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Sometimes he would look over his shoulder and see a man or a woman just staring at him for too long. Other times, he would feel a car follow him as he walked the streets. He shrugged it off. Maybe it was just paranoia. He had done this before, sneaking in and out of places, gathering secrets for his country. He wasn't worried. Not yet. But one evening, as he returned to his hotel, he noticed something strange. The door to his room was slightly open. He hadn't left it that way. His heart raced. Carefully, he stepped inside, but everything looked normal. His laptop was still on the desk, his camera in its case. Everything seemed fine, but he couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. Unknown to Valentin, a team of Burkinabe agents had been watching him closely. They had seen him come and go, and now they were ready to make their move. The pieces were falling into place, but neither Valentin nor Traoré knew that soon the hunt would come to an end. In the small, quiet hotel room, Valentin sat at his desk, typing quickly on his laptop. The room was dimly lit by a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The air was heavy with the warm, dusty smell of the city. It had been another long day of gathering information, but he wasn't tired. He felt the rush of excitement every time he sent a report back to France. He double-checked the files before clicking send. Each report contained everything he had learned about the Burkinabe military, troop movements, weapons locations, and possible alliances with other African countries. Each detail was carefully recorded. He knew it was important, and he trusted that it would be valuable. What he didn't know was that his actions were being closely watched. Each time he sent an email, the Burkinabe intelligence team picked up the signals. Alassane, the cyber analyst, had been working non-stop, tracking the foreign signals coming from Bobo Dioulasso. His job was to find the source of these mysterious transmissions and confirm if they were coming from the foreign spy they had been tracking. "There's something strange about this," Alassane said one day as he reviewed his findings. He had traced the emails back to a hotel in Bobo Dioulasso, where Valentin had been staying for several days. The signal matched the same time frame as when the spy had sent his reports. But it wasn't just the signals that raised suspicions. It was the way Valentin had blended in so easily with the locals. He had spoken to farmers, aid workers, and soldiers without drawing attention. He had the perfect cover. He wasn't a diplomat or a military man. He was just another journalist wandering through the city, taking photos. But something about him didn't feel right. Alassane felt a chill as he looked at the data on his screen. "I think we have our man," he said quietly. Traoré, who had been sitting in a dark room with a map of the city in front of him, looked up. He had been waiting for this moment, the moment when everything would fall into place. He had been cautious, wanting to be sure before making any move. But now, with Alassane's report, he knew the time had come. "We move tomorrow," Traoré said calmly, his voice steady. "Prepare a team. We'll watch him closely tonight, and then we'll make our move." The plan was simple. Keep watching. Follow Valentin without letting him know they were onto him. The team would monitor his every step, making sure there was no way for him to escape. They didn't want to give him a chance to slip away. That night, as Valentin left his hotel room and walked toward the market, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was as if someone was following him, but he kept his eyes forward, trying to stay calm. He didn't know it yet, but the net was closing in. Back at the hotel, a Burkina agent stood outside in the shadows, watching. His job was to stay out of sight, to follow Valentin without being seen. The agent adjusted his cap and stayed hidden, waiting for the right moment. He was sure that this would be the night they finally caught the spy. The night was still and quiet in Bobo Dioulasso. The heat of the day had faded, and the streets were now cooler, with only the sound of a few distant voices and the soft hum of motors in the background. Valentin walked slowly, pretending to enjoy the evening air as he made his way through the city. He had been here for almost 2 weeks now, and tonight, like every other, he planned to send another report back to France. But something felt different tonight. It was as if the streets were watching him. There was a strange tension in the air. He looked over his shoulder, but saw only a few people going about their business, just like any other evening. He shook off the feeling. Maybe it was just the stress of the mission, the long hours, the constant need to stay ahead of anyone who might be looking for him. Valentin turned a corner and entered a small alleyway near the market. The alley was dark, lit only by a few flickering streetlights. He knew this area well. It was quiet and less crowded at this hour, a perfect place to send his report without being noticed. He pulled out his laptop from the small bag he carried with him and began typing, making sure to encrypt the files before sending them. His fingers moved quickly over the keys, but his mind was elsewhere, still on that nagging feeling that someone was watching him. Unbeknownst to Valentin, the Burkina agents were already in place. They had been following him for several days now, waiting for the perfect moment. They knew he was the one sending the signals, the one gathering sensitive information, but they needed solid proof before they could act. As Valentin sat in the alley, he didn't notice the shadow that moved along the side of the street behind him. The agent, one of Traoré's best men, had been following him from a distance. He was good at blending in with the crowd, walking unnoticed, staying out of sight. Tonight, he had orders to stay as far back as possible, just observing, waiting for Valentin to make the first mistake. A few minutes later, Valentin closed his laptop and stood up, ready to leave. He was about to turn the corner when he felt a sudden chill. His instincts kicked in, and he turned quickly, scanning the area. Nothing seemed out of place. The alley was empty. "Just paranoia," he muttered to himself. But as he stepped forward, he heard footsteps behind him. Quick, light footsteps. His heart skipped a beat. He turned again, but this time, he wasn't alone. 2 men stepped out of the shadows, blocking his path. They were dressed simply, in plain clothes, but their eyes were hard, unblinking. Valentin's first thought was to run, but he knew he couldn't outrun them. He had been careful, but not careful enough. The Burkinabe agents had been one step ahead of him the entire time. "You are under arrest," one of the men said in a calm voice. "You are suspected of espionage." Valentin's mind raced. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He knew this was it, the end of his mission. He hadn't expected it to happen this way, not so suddenly, not in this quiet alley. But there was no way out now. The agents moved quickly, securing him and taking him to a waiting car. The trap had been set, and it had worked perfectly. Valentin had walked right into it. Valentin was pushed into the back of a car, his hands tied tightly behind him. The doors slammed shut, and the vehicle started moving through the dark streets of Bobo Dioulasso. Outside, the night seemed normal, quiet, as though nothing had changed. But inside the car, everything had changed for Valentin. He had been caught. He tried to stay calm, his mind racing. He had been careful, very careful, but somehow he had made a mistake. Maybe it was the feeling of being watched. Maybe it was that last small slip-up in the alley. But now, it didn't matter. He was caught, and he knew there was no way to escape. The agents in the front of the car didn't speak. They just drove, their eyes focused on the road ahead. The silence was heavy, like they were all waiting for something. Valentin could hear the low hum of the engine, the faint sound of tires rolling over the rough road. He glanced out the window, trying to get a sense of where they were going, but everything outside was just darkness. After what felt like an eternity, the car finally stopped. The doors opened, and Valentin was roughly pulled out. His legs wobbled as he stood up, still dizzy from the sudden movement. He looked around and saw that they were at a small, quiet building on the edge of the city. It wasn't a police station, but it wasn't a normal place either. It felt like a holding area, a place where things were done in secret. He was shoved inside and led down a narrow hallway. The walls were bare, and the air smelled stale, like it had been sitting there for years. The agents pushed him into a small room and slammed the door behind him. Valentin was left alone in the dim light, standing in the middle of the room with nothing but his thoughts. For a moment, he just stood there, trying to make sense of everything. How had they found him? He had been so careful, but now it was clear. His mission had failed. And what would happen to him next? He didn't know. The Burkinabe government was serious about protecting its secrets, and he had just crossed a dangerous line. His mind flashed to France, his team, his orders, but there was no help coming now. He was alone. Outside the room, voices could be heard, muffled through the walls. Valentin couldn't make out the words, but he knew they were discussing what to do with him. He didn't have long. Whatever was going to happen next would happen soon. A few minutes later, the door opened, and two men stepped inside. One was tall and calm, his expression unreadable. The other was shorter, his eyes sharp and focused. Both of them wore plain clothes, but there was a cold professionalism in their movements. "You've been caught," the tall man said, his voice steady. "We know who you are, and we know what you've been doing." Valentin remained silent, but his heart was pounding. He had been prepared for many things, but he hadn't prepared for this. He had always thought he could escape, always thought he could outsmart them. But now, with these two men standing in front of him, he knew he was trapped. "This is not a game," the shorter man said, his tone colder than before. "You'll answer for your actions." Valentin's mind raced as he wondered how long they would keep him here, and what questions they would ask. He had no way of knowing what was coming. But one thing was certain, his mission was over, and his fate now rested in the hands of the Burkinabe government. The small room was cold and silent. Valentin sat on a metal chair, his hands still tied behind his back. The two men who had entered the room earlier were now standing across from him, watching him closely. Their eyes didn't blink, their faces were expressionless. Valentin knew this wasn't going to be easy. "You're in trouble," the tall man said again, his voice steady but sharp. "Do you know why?" Valentin looked up at him, his mind working quickly. He could try to lie, but he wasn't sure how far that would get him. The Burkinabe agents seemed too prepared, too organized. Lying would only buy him a little time, but he didn't know how much time he had left. He took a deep breath and decided to be honest. "I was sent here to gather information for France." The shorter man stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "We know that. "We know everything, but what we want to know is why." Valentin didn't answer right away. What could he say? That he was working for the French government, trying to stop a country he knew little about from becoming too powerful, that he was just following orders. He didn't think they would care about any of that. "I don't know what you want me to say," Valentin said finally, his voice low. "I was just doing my job." The two men exchanged a look, as if deciding what to do next. Then the taller one spoke again. "You're not in control here anymore. We are," he said coldly. "We can make this difficult for you, or we can make it easy. The choice is yours." Valentin's heart raced. He wasn't afraid of pain. Not really. He had been trained to withstand pressure, to keep his head even in the worst situations. But this wasn't just about him anymore. He had failed his mission, and now there were consequences, not just for him, but for everyone back in France who had trusted him. "You're wasting your time," Valentin said, trying to stay calm. "You won't get anything out of me." The shorter man smirked. "We don't need to get anything out of you. We already know what we need to know." Valentin frowned. What did they know? Had they already figured out the entire mission? Or was this just some kind of game to break him, to make him reveal things he didn't want to? Before he could ask, the door opened again, and a third person entered the room. This one was different, older, with a stern face and a commanding presence. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at Valentin for a moment, sizing him up. "You've caused a lot of trouble," the new man said finally, his voice deep and calm. "But you're still alive. That's something." Valentin didn't respond. He had no idea who this new person was, but the way the two agents had stepped back when he entered made it clear he was in charge. The man leaned against the wall and crossed his arms. "I'm going to give you one chance. Tell us everything we want to know, and maybe you'll get a chance to leave here. Keep fighting, and you'll be here for a long time, and not in a place you want to be." Valentin looked at the floor, his mind working. He didn't want to cooperate, but the weight of the situation was heavy. He knew this was serious, and for the first time since his capture, he felt the full weight of the consequences. He was trapped. There was no way out. Valentin sat in the chair, his mind racing. The room felt smaller, colder now, as if the walls were closing in on him. The man standing before him, the one with the commanding presence, had given him a choice: talk or stay. But Valentin didn't know how to answer. He had been trained to protect information, to never reveal his true purpose, no matter the cost. But this wasn't a simple mission anymore. This wasn't about following orders. It was about survival. "You don't have to make this harder than it is," the man said, his voice low and calm. "We already know you've been gathering intelligence. We know what you were looking for. Now we just need the details. Your government will deny everything, and they will leave you to deal with this on your own. Do you want that?" Valentin didn't say anything at first. The words echoed in his head. The truth was that he had no idea what would happen next. He didn't know how far the Burkina government was willing to go to protect their secrets, or how much they were willing to push him for answers. But what he did know was that he couldn't hold out forever. He had heard stories of other spies who had been caught, people who had cracked under pressure. He had been trained to stay calm, to keep his focus. But this was different. The room was too quiet, the tension too thick. Every second felt like an hour. "You're not going to get anything from me," Valentin said finally, his voice steady. It wasn't a lie. He was still determined to hold out, but in the back of his mind, he was starting to question if that was even possible anymore. The older man sighed, as if he had expected this answer. He took a step forward and looked Valentin in the eye. "I warned you. You'll regret making it harder on yourself." The two agents behind him stepped closer, but the older man held up a hand, stopping them. "Give him time. Maybe he'll think differently." Valentin was left alone again in the room. This time, it felt different. He could still hear voices outside the door, but the silence in the room felt heavier, as though something had shifted. He knew they were waiting for him to break. They were giving him time, but how much time would he have before it was too late? As he sat there, he began to think of home, of France, his team, his family. He had joined the mission because he believed in it, believed in what his country was doing. But now, he wasn't so sure. He wasn't sure of anything anymore. Minutes passed, and finally, the door opened once more. The older man entered, and this time, he wasn't alone. A few agents stepped in behind him, each one serious and focused. Valentin's heart pounded. He had made his decision. There was no turning back now. "I'll talk," Valentin said, his voice quieter than before. The words felt heavy, like a weight he couldn't lift. He had reached the point where silence was no longer an option. The price of staying quiet was too high. The older man nodded, a small smile on his face. "Good choice," he said. "We'll get started then." Valentin had given up his secret, but in doing so, he had taken the first step in securing his own future. It wasn't the end he had hoped for, but it was a start, and sometimes that was all a person could hope for in the face of impossible choices.